Hello, and I'm Josh Hallam, and you are listening to Just Films and That's, the podcast where we celebrate the films we think are underrated, underseen, or we just wanted to talk about them. This week's film is Imperium, so let's see what we think. So, Alice.
Yes, Josh.
Imperium.
Indeed.
Following Equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
Not a sequel.
No, it's not, surprisingly.
Very different films.
It is, yeah.
You've picked this one, obviously, so it's from 2016, so no spoilers. Sorry. There are spoilers. The opposite of what I just said.
There's no spoilers.
No spoilers. There's so many. Imperium, it's from 2016. You've picked this one, so spoiler warnings for those of you who haven't seen it. So, Alice, intrigued by this one. What's it about and why did you pick it?
So, to keep it brief, it's about an FBI agent called Nate, played by Daniel Radcliffe, and he's assigned a mission basically to infiltrate a white supremacy group because the feds think that they're about to commit a terror offense, basically. They've sort of traced these chemicals that have been imported from abroad, and they think that they're going to use them to blow up some government buildings. And that's basically what it's about, really. We follow Daniel Radcliffe on his journey and like how he deals with this situation. I picked it because I do believe it's underseen. I saw it kind of by accident. I think I've said to you before, and you might remember too, listeners, that after watching Swiss Army Man, I went on a bit of a Daniel Radcliffe bender because I was like, oh, wow, he's actually a really great actor. Daniel Radcliffe bender. Because I was like, he's actually a great actor. I want to see more from him. And this was one, I think I was literally just scrolling on Amazon and this one was there. And I was like, oh, there he is. I'll watch this then, I guess. And I was like, oh, this is actually really good. And I thought I was really impressed by it. And then I hadn't heard anybody mention it. I don't know anyone who'd seen it. And it got a very limited release as well.
Yeah.
And was only available in like one place for a lot of time until it dropped on Amazon.
I mean, I'll say this. I hadn't even heard of it.
There we go.
So this is in the
fitting into the category of underseen.
This is in the Brothers Solomon category, which might be the only other film in this category. I've literally never heard of it.
You hadn't heard of Brothers Solomon, hadn't you?
No. So other than I can't think of another film you've picked. There's obscure ones, but I definitely think I've heard of them. Yeah. But I not. The only reason I knew Daniel Radcliffe was in this film is because he's on the poster when you look for it to watch it. So
with his shaved head,
with his shaved head,
and his new tattoo.
So let's get into it then. So let's do we think it's underseen? Well, we've started pretty strongly on that front.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what we liked about the film. So obviously you've watched this again. So you must have watched this quite recently then. I mean, in the last year?
Within the last year. And it immediately went on my list.
This is it. Did you watch it again or did you just... Because sometimes there is a temptation. I've watched films where I've gone, this would be a good pick for the podcast.
Because you know it
from start to finish. If I just make... No, what I mean is like, you watch a film that you think might be underrated or underseen, you think, this would be a good pick for the podcast. I could just take notes now.
Oh, I see what you mean. Like every time, even when you go to the cinema, like I'm there watching Sonic 2, like making notes. Like, we'll do this one eventually.
Excuse me, my son is trying to enjoy Sonic 2. Why have you got your laptop? No,
excuse me in the corner.
Excuse me, this woman is watching. But the way I don't know about you, the way I take notes is so chaotic that I just get everything down and then figure it out.
Yeah.
A few days later when we're prepping for the episode. So I always, we're professional here, guys. We always watch the film.
Of course.
I genuinely don't think there's ever a film we've done where I've not watched it all the way through. Anyway.
Oh, God, no.
So you did watch it again then. So with a more critical eye then, what did you like about it?
So there is a lot that I like about this film, and I'll just focus on the main things because we've only got a limited amount of time. So I really like the way that the story is told. I think the concept itself doesn't feel particularly fresh or groundbreaking. It's an FBI agent going undercover to stop a terrorist plot. Okay, simple enough. But I do enjoy the way that the story is told. There's not a huge amount of exposition dumping, and even in the conversations between characters that reveal a lot of information, they all feel very normal. So nothing ever feels forced, and for me, it all felt quite naturalistic. I think this is helped with the use of other things that help tell the story, such as websites, photographs, PowerPoints, audio recordings, books, and what appears to be archive footage. And this sometimes gives it a slightly documentary-like quality, I thought, which
there's a lot of imagery, really isn't there? There's a lot of imagery.
Yeah, and that's sort of it's world building, isn't it? And it's kind of letting you know, because it's as Daniel Radcliffe's character, so Nate, as he's looking through all this stuff, he's got to get in the right headspace to think like a white supremacist and become a white supremacist, so he doesn't get found out while he's trying to, infiltrate. So he's watching all this content, he's reading all this stuff.
Reading Mein Kampf and all the other lesser known books and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. So then you feel exposed to the same stuff that that the characters in the film do, which I thought had quite a powerful effect. I think it's written really well, and things didn't feel forced, and especially when it was time to move the story along from one sort of plot to the next or whatever. So for instance, when Nate is first approached by his colleague Angela, played by Toni Collette, who I know you love, so I also picked this for you, Josh. So I know you love Toni. So when she approaches him to do the undercover operation, we cut from Nate basically saying he can't do it, why are you choosing me? There's no way, I'm not tough or any of this. So then a few moments later, his superior Tom saying, are you out of your fucking mind? So you get that progression then. It's like, oh, he's decided to do it now. It's not him running into his office going, put me in, coach, just give me a chance. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I can do it.
Come on, I can take these neo-Nazis, coach.
Exactly.
I took down Voldemort, I can take down...
Well, exactly. Danny, boy, could do anything. And it wasn't like that. It was a bit more sophisticated than that, and a bit more well thought out, and a bit more subtle, I suppose. There's quite a lot of silence in it as well. Not every single second is filled with dialogue, which I think really makes you focus on what's happening on screen and the events that are taking place. And this really enhances the tension building as well, which is a really strong factor in this film, I thought. So you're dealing with an undercover agent, right? So you're just waiting for him to get found out the whole time. So from the moment he meets his target, Vince, and his gang in the sort of diner place, you're just totally on edge and invested in this line of action, thinking, oh my God, how is he going to do it? How is he going to keep up this ruse? Because they depict him to be a bit, I guess, like a bit of a timid character.
He's quite isolated, isn't he? He's a loner. He's not one of the, he's not, it does a good job of showing you all these testosterone driven FBI agents, and he likes books and classical music and wine and their beer and sport and push-ups.
Exactly.
All the stuff. And I think they do a good, and I agree that the tension building is, there's a bit in it, there's a couple of bits in it, but one bit in particular where obviously he's undercover, so he has to pretend to be a neo-Nazi, and he's on a neo-Nazi march, and his friend who is black notices him and recognizes him and starts talking to him, going what are you doing?
What are you doing, Nate?
What are you doing here? So I think, and he can't blow his cover, so he does, well, without going into it, I think it's pretty obvious what he does to not blow his cover.
He's abusive to him, isn't he? He's verbally abusive to him.
The language used, I mean, it's abhorrent and everything like that, but the tension in that bit where you're going, oh shit, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? Yeah. And there's other bits as well where obviously he is an FBI agent, so he doesn't want to blow his cover, but also he doesn't want people to get hurt. So there's a bit where they approach a couple who are one of them's black and one of them's white, so they're sort of, they take issue with the mixing of the races or whatever, because they're arseholes, and he has to try and stop them beating them up.
Yeah, so he's
but also not blow
his situation.
But also not blow his cover, and it's a really interesting. There's a couple of really interesting sort of dilemmas thrown in there about what you do for the greater good. Because the actions he still takes to not blow his cover are still bad.
Yeah,
but he is doing them for the right reasons. I know it's a really strange way to put it, but the tension building is excellent, I thought.
Yeah, but the feeling is they will kill him if they find out who he is, definitely. They're quite aggressive characters. We know they've got access to weapons and stuff, and will they just kill someone in broad daylight? I mean, quite possibly. That is the impression that you get.
They're going to blow up a load of people in an act of terrorism, then why wouldn't you be?
So there's a lot of him having to think on his feet and stuff, and I feel like I just connected with him completely. I just connect with the character. I thought the performance was brilliant, really, assisted by a terrific script as well. there was some great attention to detail in there as well that I really liked. So things like the gang speaking in hushed tones when they're in the diner. So when they have their first meeting, Vince, who's like the leader of this part of the gang, they're doing like not an initiation, but I guess just trying to find out who Nate is. Why is he like this? You know, he says his sort of backstory is he was in Iraq and he saw a lot of his friends go down and all this. And Vince is talking in very hushed tones. You know, he's only just above a whisper, because they know that they can't be heard talking about the kind of shit that they're talking about in public. But then you've got Roy, who's another member of the group, who's a bit more of a loose cannon. You know, he's more outwardly threatening. He's very, he's very aggressive.
Likes to fight,
he's very rude.
Likes,
exactly.
Likes to fight.
You've also, in that scene as well, there are flies buzzing around their heads, which I thought was interesting. And I was like, ooh, what is the film trying to convey here? Is it that they're rotten on the inside and then that's why these flies are buzzing around them, that sort of thing? Or is it just to make the audience feel uncomfortable without knowing why they feel uncomfortable?
Then that could be either, couldn't it? So that's the real. So that's a real skill. There's a real skill in that, because some people might read into it. Some people might just go, God, I don't like that.
Yeah, exactly, and not know why, right? Because you've got this very real and obvious, uncomfortable thing in the kind of Nazis, in the imagery, in this white supremacy rhetoric that they're going with, and then there's just a couple of flies buzzing around their heads, and it's like, ugh, weird. And things like, having swastikas on cupcakes, because obviously we visit a few of the sort of white supremacy families and their wives, and they're cooking and making house and stuff. And there's this scene where she brings out a tray of cupcakes with a swastika on them. And that obviously invokes such a myriad of feelings, because it's like, oh, something nice and cute and familiar in a cupcake with this really like a symbol that we regard as being horrific and has got such strong associations with something so horrible. And there was a lot of that going on, and I thought it all just worked really well to build this picture and to build this world and to really suck you in and to put you on edge and to make you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, so following on from that, that's one of the main things I liked about the film, which is it reminded me in some ways, not to the same extent as Funny Games.
Interesting.
It did some really interesting things in its relationship with you as an audience member. So it starts with a quote about something to do with building bridges or building a better world.
Yeah, words are the route to building bridges.
Yeah, and it's about creating a better world. Yeah. And you immediately go, oh, that must be from like a positive historical figure, or like someone to do with the FBI or something like that. And then immediately it's like Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
So right from the get-go, it's like, this is going to make you question not necessarily your beliefs, because I don't think that's what it's about. I'm not saying it's like, oh, we're all for neo-Nazism here, but I like the way that it teases you and communicates with you as an audience member. So I think what it does a good job of then later in the film after that is creating this group of neo-Nazis as actual people. Mm-hmm. So I think there are plenty of films about this sort of thing where it's really easy to give them just no backstory, one note, they're just that and they're horrible. And of course, what they believe is abhorrent and all that, but they are people and they do arrive at that conclusion, not necessarily for a reason, not a rational reason, but there's always a reason. It, doesn't mean it's a good reason or a rational reason, but it is there. So to see them, because they're not all skinheads as well, so they're not all Nazis in the way that you think of with shaved heads and the tattoos. Some of them are
Jerry,
just Jerry. So there's Jerry, who's like, he's a family man, he's an engineer, who's got a nice house, kids, family.
He's a
vegetarian.
Doing a barbecue.
Yeah, and so they have these family parties or these parties where they're all round, they're all friends, there's kids running around, and you hear the kids and they say things that reflect their beliefs and all that sort of thing. And so they make them people. So you see them having nice houses, listening to music, nice cars, normal people. Because ultimately there are normal people who hold these beliefs. They're not all, they're not all villains from an action film, So I thought that was really, and so rather by making them monsters, they make them human beings, and they make you realize that they're quite a lot like us, but they just don't share your beliefs, or maybe you do, I don't know, but for most people, I'd like to think anyway, they don't share the beliefs of this, and that only heightens the impact of what you're seeing and how they're speaking and their beliefs, and I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, definitely.
To show you them as people, not as, well, I guess to show you them as people, not as villains. And what I mean by that is they are the antagonists of the film, but they're not I don't know. They're not villains, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Because our hero obviously is Nate, and he's not the one they're after.
Yeah.
Like, it would be different if we were following, say, a black family.
Yeah, if you think of something like, if you think of something as like Black Klansman, if you've seen Black Klansman, that's obviously the focal point of that is true story of a black FBI agent who infiltrated the KKK.
Mm-hmm.
So that is obviously much more of a part of it than that. But you're right, that's a really interesting point, which is he could be one of them because he's made up to look like one of them, but he isn't. But they would have no problem with him.
Yeah. So did you like it then? I feel like I'd completely brushed over that.
Yeah,
I got a bit too excited.
So I really enjoyed it.
Okay,
yeah, so
cool,
overall, I really enjoyed it. I think there's a lot to like in there. That was one of the standouts for me, which was that interesting idea of humanizing these people. And so, this sound like a wanky thing to say, but holding a mirror up to blah, blah, blah.
You love a wanky thing to say.
Yeah. So holding a mirror up and no. But the fact is that it humanizes them. And by humanizing them, it just highlights the horror. And it's almost that idea of plenty of people are not that far away from that if they go down a road that leads them there.
Yeah.
And that's the real horror, is that they're not bad guys in Indiana Jones. But they're not
scary monsters.
Yeah, they're not scary. They're not scary monsters. You know,
the monster in the Blue Lagoon or Black Lagoon.
There are plenty of people alive now who remember them the first time round, and there are plenty of people right now who affiliate themselves with them politically or ideologically or whatever you want to call it. So it's still a real problem. It's not going away.
It's like social horror, isn't it? It's like a different kind of horror.
By going and look at these people having a barbecue, just like you might have a barbecue, except their cupcakes have got swastikas on rather than Peppa Pig or whatever. So I thought that was a really interesting idea, and I thought it was quite a brave idea as well, quite a brave choice to sort of to go to you as an audience member again. And that's where the comparison to funny games comes in. That's that comparison to horror being, you know, a bad day away sort of thing, if you like. So but no, overall, I did really enjoy it. And again, back to that point, I really enjoyed the whole idea of it starts off and they bombard you with all this imagery and it gets quicker and quicker and more frantic of far right imagery, and it's you know, back to the war or more recent images like Timothy McVeigh and that sort of thing. And I thought at first it's quite overwhelming, and then the film does a really good job of continuing to do that, and you just adjust. And you just become used to these images. You go, oh, look, another KKK rally there.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you become numb to it as Nate becomes numb to it. And then, I just thought that was really interesting. And then again, back to your point, Daniel Radcliffe gives a fantastic performance in this. He is great. I like the Harry Potter films. I don't think he's the strongest actor.
Well, and this is This is why I think I appreciate Daniel Radcliffe so much now, is because the odd Harry Potter film that I did see, I saw him and I was like, I mean, he's not a good actor. And I didn't really think any of the kids were particularly good actors. So
doesn't help that they're surrounded by like the best British actors as well.
Well,
like,
indeed.
But no, I think the other two, as in Emma Watson and Rupert Grint, are much stronger than him. And I know he's got a lot to do. And it's difficult because I don't know how, you know, it must have been quite a difficult thing to write, because obviously the books were such a phenomenon and they probably was different in every...
And they're kids, man.
Yeah, and
like,
they're kids.
What was he, 11 when it started?
The books are probably... He might be different in everyone's mind. That's the tricky part of adapting a book, isn't it? You know, one person's Harry is a different person's Harry, and interpretations, etc., etc. But obviously he's very good in Swiss Army Man, and he's really good in this. And he does a lot of good stuff, like where... When he's practicing becoming Nate, you see him do things like adjust his stance, adjust his posture, change his voice. So he's got quite a sort of not high pitch, but he's got a higher voice, a higher tone to his voice, and a more nasal tone to his voice. Then when he's going to be Nate, he deepens his voice. And you see him practicing doing that. And then he does that. And then throughout the film, it cuts with him having meetings with Tony Collette, who's his boss, his handler. And he goes back to being Nate, the FBI agent. And you can sort of see him make those differences between him as a person, him as an undercover. And I thought that was really interesting. I did think he pulled it off as well. He did. I think what Daniel Radcliffe does a lot, and I've not seen loads and loads of films outside of Harry Potter and Swiss Army Man, but he brings a real vulnerability to the character in this. And I thought that was really good. That was really important. You know, you could easily play this like, I know, I've got in my notes here, it's a cross between Black Klansman, American History X, and The Departed. But another film that's similar in plot is like, if you think of Point Break.
Okay, you know what? I haven't seen it.
You've not seen Point Break, and you like
Keanu
Reeves.
I know, and he's got long hair, and there's lots of surfing going on. It's criminal.
But he, I'm going to pick it. I'm just going to pick it.
Do it, please.
But in that, it's very much an action film first. But there is no real vulnerability to Keanu Reeves' character in that film. He's not particularly developed character in terms of the writing or whatever. It's all in the concept, it's all in the stunts and all that. But in this, Daniel Radcliffe, I think, does bring that real vulnerability to Nate as a character. But anyway, what else? You picked this. So what else did you like about it?
So, I mean, you've touched on it there about the performances, and not just Daniel Radcliffe, but everyone pretty much. I found everyone to be convincing, and you've got an array of different personalities here. Like we said about Roy, he's very loud, very outwardly aggressive, very paranoid, which actually makes him the least threatening of the lot. Then you've got someone like Vince, who's much calmer, much more collected, and there's something quite menacing about that. And then little Johnny, who's just like this young kid that's getting swept along in it all, who then gets his redemption at the end after having been arrested. And then Jerry, who for me is one of the more interesting characters, right? He's a family man. He's a cultured man who likes music and is a vegetarian and seems to be a great dad and a great husband. And I quite like what he symbolizes, or at least what I think he symbolizes. Because something that really grinds my gears, and this is just my opinion, is when something bad happens in the news, right? So say someone murders someone or commits a horrible crime. A lot of the time, the people who knew them say things like, oh, but he was so lovely. He never would have done something like that. He wouldn't hurt a fly. He was such a good neighbor and all this. And I feel like people are really quick to forget that the version of someone that you know is the version that they are choosing to show you.
Yeah.
Like if you were Jerry's neighbor and you saw the FBI swarm his house and arrest him like they do at the end of the film, you'd be so confused. Like this responsible father, husband who has barbecues and dinner parties. Surely he's not a terrorist. So I like that it challenges that narrative and challenges the narrative that people think that criminals look a certain way
like
or act a certain way,
like
when obviously it can be anyone at any time. It could be your friendly neighbor. Do you know what I mean? Because you do hear it quite a lot. Maybe I hear it a lot more because I work in the news. I don't know. But people are like, oh, I never would have thought it would be him. Or I never thought he would do something like that. And it's like, you should be prepared for anyone to do anything.
Yeah, not everyone has got like facial scars and like...
Exactly, one eye.
I know everyone looks like
or chewed their
Bond
digits
villain.
off in a prison in Russia. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on then to talking about things that we either didn't like about the film or that we perhaps changed. I don't get the impression this is going to be a big list for you, but is there anything that you would have liked to have seen differently?
So there's just two things, and I'll start with the least severe. So I have mentioned before how I can't stand people chewing gum. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So we had Colin Farrell doing it in Minority Report. I feel like we've had a couple more. I'm pretty sure like someone in The Replacements does it.
Yeah.
And now we've got Toni Collette, so Angela. She's doing it like
the
pretty
Nicorette,
much
and it's like
all the way through
Nicorette
this
gum.
film.
She's,
yeah, because every now and then she'll actually smoke a cigarette. And it just annoys me. I hate the sound. I hate the mouth movement. I don't want to see inside your mouth all the time. Like, it's different when someone's talking, but when you're chewing and then she's having conversations with people while she's chewing, just irritates me.
I'm going to try and find a film that is solely about the chewing of gum.
Well, I'm sure for some ASMR fans, like, that's paradise. Do you know what I mean? But that just ain't for me. But, you know, that ain't going to ruin
So beside
the
usual hating the chewing of gum, what is that?
Well, the other thing, and sticking with Toni Collette, so with Angela, so when Dallas Wolfe, who we didn't even mention in the likes there, but Dallas Wolfe is a character who is a bit like, say, Alex Jones in America.
Like a sensationalist journalist presenter who has his own channel and peddles hate, if you like.
Yeah, he does the podcast. He's very clever to never actually incite violence. He just talks a lot about how white supremacy is good and how white people should rule the world. It's back to that.
It's just entertainment, man. What do you mean?
Exactly, because to him it is, isn't it?
I'm just an entertainer,
He says he doesn't believe it. He's just doing it to get
money. Just want to be president.
Money.
Oh, politics. Anyway.
Yeah. So when he ends up down at the police station or down at the FBI station, and Angela starts questioning him, and she just blurts out that she knows that his house is setting off a Geiger counter. So they think that he's got like some radioactive stuff or whatever, and that he's part of this plan to blow up this government building, and that he has this radioactive material.
Blows the operation, basically.
Well, basically, yeah. So then he's like, well, no, it's because I've got prostate cancer. So it's obviously, from the treatment for that.
Or whatever.
And I was just so shocked that she did that. Like, you completely sacrificed Nate's safety there and possibly your own safety. He now knows that someone has been intimately close to his house and knows that information. So I was either like, A, is she really just that stupid that she would allow that to come out of her mouth? Or B, is that even something that her character would do? And it was literally just a case of, we need the story to move on to the next bit. And even though I said at the beginning of the episode, they were very clever about how they move on from one plot to the next. But that, I was just like, I just didn't buy it. I didn't buy, after everything, like her convincing Nate to do it, like the danger of what he's doing. And then she basically tells Dallas Wolf, someone who they literally thought 5 minutes ago that he was like the head honcho and the one planning this terrorist attack.
Well, he's who they're trying to get, isn't he?
It all away.
It starts off, it's like, this is the guy. You got to get close to this guy because he's the leader.
And then to be
like, well, we're basically investigating you. Shit. Like,
we've got a tail on you. Someone's been in your house. We're setting off a Geiger counter.
I didn't even notice that, actually. I didn't notice that.
I just didn't
buy it. I think that was one of those scenes that it was like, well, this has to happen to move it along.
I think they just needed to happen, and possibly they needed a bit more peril. Like they needed a bit more peril for Nate, and it's like, and that's the moment, I suppose, like I was saying before, like all that tension about, oh my God, is he going to get found out? When is he going to get found out? Oh my God, this is so tense. I'm on the edge of my seat. Then that was that, I guess, but I just didn't expect it to happen in that way, and I just didn't buy that her character would do that. But that was it. I think it's a brilliant film. I think it's a really interesting concept and story that's told really well, that's delivered with a brilliant script and some excellent cast. And I think it looks pretty good as well. Like the way it's shot, I think is really, really clever to sort of throw you into that world and to feel the tension. What about you, Josh? Was there anything that you didn't like or would perhaps change?
So there's not anything that's massive. There's a couple of bits. So the first one I have is, I don't know if this could have been my TV, right? But
go on.
There was a couple of issues with lighting, particularly between when there's conversations in rooms between Toni Collette and Daniel Radcliffe's character, where it's really poorly lit. And I don't know if it's because they're supposed to be being discreet, but I literally could not see what was going on. So
on your TV remote, Josh, there's a button called settings. No, I'm only joking. So I can't say I noticed, but I imagine that's, like you say, that's probably a stylistic choice.
It just made me go, I
right?
can't see what's going on, so it takes me out the scene a little bit.
Bad?
Yeah.
Oh,
not loads,
no,
just a little bit like, I can't see what's going on. I would have liked a little bit more exposition later on in the film around, I guess. So the whole thing is that Daniel Radcliffe, they suspect they're going to be building a bomb out of homemade chemicals or chemicals that you can get on the internet or whatever. And so they set up a front medical supply company because that company would be able to get this stuff. But it never, unless you know how to build a bomb, which I don't know about you, but most people don't know how to build a bomb. It lost me a little bit in some of the dialogue later on when it was all about whether they should use this chemical or this chemical. So I would have perhaps liked a little bit more, not necessarily a dump or like a, spoon feeding me, just a little bit more like, why is what they're doing significant? A little bit more around the plot, their actual plot, I mean. So I thought that could have done. Couple of pacing issues in the middle of the film, but overall I thought it moved at a good pace. I would have liked a little bit more. So the payoff at the ending is that Nate finishes the mission and then he seems to get a job in Texas doing another thing, and then you get a bit of a payoff, don't you, where it's a few years later and the youngest kid who was in the gang, who was sort of just being initiated, is now reformed and is going around giving talks.
Little Johnny.
And it's a lovely little ending, but I would have liked to have seen more of his character earlier on for that to have been more of a payoff. Because he's only really in one scene, two scenes.
You get one conversation between him, like one significant conversation where you get a bit of his backstory with Nate. But then otherwise, because he's with Vince and Roy, because whenever Roy is in a scene, he is dominating that scene, isn't he? And there's obviously the moment where where Johnny gets arrested, which is, quite powerful as well. What I like about that ending when he's at the school giving these talks to these kids, so he looks so young, and I think when you see him for the first time sort of in the diner and he's got a shaved head and he's wearing a wife beater, you don't quite appreciate how young he is. But then when you put him in a school setting and his hair has grown back, he's like, oh my God, he looks like he could be 14.
Yeah. So in principle, I think that's a really good ending, especially with what we're talking about the way that it presents you with the Nazis and stuff like that. I think that it could have been slightly more satisfying if we'd have just been given a little bit more earlier on in the film. Okay, so let's move on to talking about the critical reception then. Now, Alice, you picked this because it's underseen.
I do believe so, yes.
I mean, even before we do the critical reception, I think it's underseen. I think it's there's definitely something there. You know, it's not a family film. It's not like a...
no,
but it's definitely something there for people to enjoy for all the reasons we talked about. So I think it is underseen. I think it should be seen by more people. But let's look at the rating as well. So...
Yeah, what are you thinking, Josh?
What am I thinking?
Throw a guess at me.
I think it probably did okay, like with the critics, just not that many people saw it. So let's say, I don't want to go too high. Let's say it gets like a solid 7. I would give it probably a solid 7.5.
Yeah,
but I would say the critics, I think, a 7. Let's go a solid 7. Lay it on me.
So at the time of recording on IMDb, it gets 6.5. And then over on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience give it a very similar 64%.
Right.
But the critics are there to impress me. For once. No, not for once. They've done a few. They've had a few good decisions, to be fair. The critics gave it 84%.
Right. So, yeah.
So averaging, if you're going to balance those out, you were probably sort of quite right with this kind of middle 7, because we've got middle 6s there and a middle 8 from the audience, from the critics, sorry. So I think from the critics, I think that's appropriately rated.
Yeah.
I think the audience score is a bit low. Like when I went on IMDb to check and I saw this was another reason why I chose it, I think, because on the IMDb page, I was like 6.5, man. I was like, that feels a bit low. So appropriate from the critics, audience a bit low, but ultimately I think it's underseen. I don't know many people who have seen it, and it got limited release, and I just don't think it was particularly marketed that much, and I've never seen an ad for it, and never seen a trailer for it.
I guess maybe what do you market it as? Maybe that's the issue. Because it's not an action
like
film.
Social
so you said earlier, it's a
something.
crime social thriller, but it's not one of those films you might not seek it. Oh, it's a gripping thriller about neo-Nazism. Oh, well, I'll check that out. Like you might think it's a bit heavy or whatever. But
that's the thing, and I think that's probably why it scored so high with the critics, because it's quite a difficult subject matter, I suppose, with great performances and a great script. But if you're watching a film for fun, which most people do, I mean, it's not fun. But if you're looking for certain qualities of films, it does have those. And I think that's why we both enjoyed it, because we are actively looking for those things. Well, there we go then. Imperium, underseen, but maybe appropriately rated by the critics. Anyway, Josh, what are we going to be watching next week?
Next week, we will be watching and talking about Bruce Almighty.
Interesting. Okay, then I'll try to not say or do anything else, especially these weird noises that just came out of my mouth.
I've never heard you make noises like that. Yes, so join us next week when we will be talking about Bruce Almighty. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, it's justfilmsandthatpod@gmail.com, and we're on all the social medias. If you just search for Just Films and That Pod, please do, if you get the chance, scooch on over and give us a little rating on iTunes or Spotify. We're on YouTube as well, if you could subscribe over there. Anything that helps is always appreciated, and if you want to suggest a film, then please do, because we're always up for listener suggestions. We've had a couple in, and we've got a couple coming up, and I think they're going to be quite interesting little watches. So, we're also on your telly. Aren't we, Alice?
We are indeed, Josh. Yes,
surprising.
We're on the local TV network every Friday from 6 p.m. So if you live in Birmingham, Bristol, Leeds, Liverpool, or the North East, you can find us on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. We're also on Channel 195 on Sky. That's every Friday night from 6 o'clock on the local TV network, and sometimes Mondays as well.
Yes, there you go. There are many ways you can catch us. So join us next week when we're going to be talking about Bruce Almighty. Thank you very much, Alice Oliver. Cheerio.
Bye.